story is a ghost story unto itself, which is to say another story completely different, assuming any of what follows can rightly even be considered a ghost story. Rather than delve into the devices and biases and oddly canted idiom of the five persons.
One of whom in the early years slept with another and now endlessly wanders about the lakes of fall.
Where someone else once wandered.
Two of whom still nurture their affection for one another, expressing so in an array of notes and overseas phone calls.
A fourth who lost three, and the last of whom from the prison of a later life hates them all.
Or represent them throughout with characterizing phrases, temporal references, and even more quotation marks, hopelessly nested within reiterating nests of still more. To delineate their respective and independently conducted interviews, colored quotation marks are used instead.
Or voices.
Voices.
Tonight, only voices.
And
And
shadows.
Many shadows.
Where no voices sound, only the worst should be assumed. An interruption by someone other than one of the before-mentioned persons, the reader, or even the author, who additionally, it must be stated, has done nothing more than lend together these gathered and re-related bits so as to here present a pretty peculiar and perhaps alternate history of one October
evening
in East Texas. No matter how you cut it,
No matter.
Chintana Ned didn't accept.
only at the last moment for reasons vague.
If vaguely professional.
Did she force from herself a reply in the affirmative, obviously, to
Acceptate.
Yes, except.
the invitation?
Mose Dettledown's invitation.
Fact is, what Chintana had discovered since the divorce was that most everything required
Force.
Opening her eyes, her hands, even opening her medicine cabinet.
Force.
Force open the can of bitter tea leaves. Force back the tough tongues of those walking shoes she kept perched by a bird cage.
Force even a smirk she hoped could serve, temporarily at least, as a not-so-scored and hard-hunted a
shimily.
Especially when, in the acknowledgement of something she recognized as social duty, she was forced to acknowledge
Yet again.
To yet another intrusive customer, her husband Pravat's surprising departure.
Provence.
Cravat.
Force back something else, too.
Mustn't forget that.
The terrible agony she wished day out and night in to lash across the throat of anyone who forced from her all such incessant acts of acknowledging.
In the first place.
Despite Pacific beliefs, only infliction promised her peace.
And for sure.
As Chintana had found out.
What came most effortlessly to her nowadays had already happened.
But 5 weeks earlier, when the scissors, doing their happy skew across the
Bias of a patent lawyer's drapes dancing silvery
Sharp through the separating cotton, arrested finally when their metal V wedged deep into her.
Soft thumb.
She lost the nail, but the local hand surgeon had stitched back the flap.
taped on a butterfly for good measure, too.
And she had forced herself to thank him, and
Somehow,
Carry on.
but she did not then, as she could not now, seem to acknowledge to herself just how easily she could have seen it happen to someone
else's.
dumb.
And so, of course,
Chintana had once more reconsidered whether or not
She'd make it.
To Mose Dettledown's Halloween party.
it seemed she probably would have taken a miss had it not been for
Her twin.
Stitchmacated.
In Austin.
who had sternly counseled.
risk it.
So Jindana had risked it, preparing her bitter tea and swallowing hard before leaving behind the thread and machines of her tree.
Her unoccupied cage.
For the 182 East.
Running and stabbing hope through the fallen dark.
Chintana always found the particulars of Mose Dettledown's gatherings odd.
But what else could one expect from a 112-year-old nutjob, still at ease?
In those deteriorating ribs of her East Texas removed, slumped down amidst the hickory.
And Mexican wild
Plum.
A few times a year, Mose would generously serve up
And
booze.
sweet.
To foretypify the many strangers against the expected strangeness of her minglings where someone like Chintana, a seamstress, could find herself.
deflecting the advances of an inebriated city alderman.
Mose, though rarely appeared herself. In fact, running into her at all, certainly tonight, would be like crossing up with a ghost.
Though a ghost would be nice.
Crossing up with a ghost, thought Chintana, was about the only thing that would keep her from
Cutting her own appearance short.
fact, Jeanlouis had only gotten as far as the coat rack when she thought for the third
And last time.
About retreat.
This being so because the very first person
Not the third or even the
second, but the very
First person.
she was forced to smile at was the already smirking Belinda Kite.
Right there in Moe's Dettledown's foyer atrium.
Belinda Kite, eyeing Jeanlouis's entrance with shearing scrutiny.
More red-eyed than a coyote sniffing a salt block and drought.
Bango rattle arm, twisting rattler, mean into her song.
Gums receding around the dead shine of her teeth like...
Well now, if it isn't Miss Lost and Let Down.
Belinda Kite might have snipped.
Or more benignly,
Delivers in the bag.
Or just a lucky carnal cluckety-click.
And maybe something like so did actually tickle her teeth-tickling lips.
But it never got no further.
Not that night.
And what a cold, cold night it had already become.
The
Because...
sharpest tongue in East Texas knew her. One word, even the slightest indication of intimacy, could very well have brought about her own extinction. And
Had the two women actually
a
touched?
pat, perhaps?
oh no,
something slight and passing.
the results would have been cataclysmic, even worse.
Unimaginable.
And so right there on the spot,
Those pocked eyes.
Flittering nervously around like a murder?
Of crows told Chintana.
Belinda Kite knew exactly what she had become.
Here, then, was another consequence of Belinda Kite's stolen times would provide.
Belinda Kite, who could routinely make anyone cry from Fort Worth to Nacogdoches.
who most certainly would make some poor wretch cry tonight.
It's all right then.
Right there.
Right square in the middle of Moe's Dettledown's foyer atrium, something she could not challenge.
Or even reach for.
And so practically ran.
Scurrying backwards, pocketed eyes flying off to his side, until Oliver was sidewinding gone for the stammer of guests in the back.
Chintana shook inside and reconsidered her twin's counsel.
Maybe some things aren't worth the risk.
And then along came the little ones.
And that sure put a change in her.
After all, what did they
know about risk.
Or care, for that matter.
They
We're too young. Their play.
The privacy of that practical mayhem and racket?
protected them.
Zigzagging this way.
Their way.
Dash down diversion fast across the dining room.
Eastern cottontails.
Sweet baby bobwhites.
Down some stairs, spinning sideways, socks slipping them up
on
some.
the smooth groove floors.
With those small hands, always grabbing fast
A
enough.
possum grip for a quarter.
Just in time to catch the slide and swing them into accelerating arc towards another warped hall.
And sure comes spring. The wraparound porch outside with its gate that the sweet gum
Lob, lollipop.
and maple could serve their turns.
Pernicious turns.
But tonight,
With the wind already whipping at something wrong.
The dogs howling in their kennels.
5 such
orphans confined their tie-dye hues to the shadow of adult conversation and back rooms.
Steeped in abandonment.
Theirs was abandonment's insurrection.
The coup de grace of feral play.
And so they flung themselves so.
panting and rosy past the foyer door.
Astride their steeds, Styx, Palomino, Buckskin.
Sorrel, bay, and black, and
Chintana felt herself warm and ease.
Here was enough.
they were enough.
And even if Chintana wasn't quite able to put her thumb on it, how strange still that just 5
Orphans, with but the pat-pitter of their footsteps on such an instant,
after such an incident.
Could catch Stitch, a bit at least. The lacerations of grief 6 months continued to inflict. Their offer was somehow different from everything else.
Something mock felt and clean.
As if to say,
so to say,
Or so it seemed.
There was time.
there was time.
Yes, there still was time.
so maybe Chintana had misconstrued Moe's Dettledown's invitation after all.
Wallops of scotch, dear. Don't deprive yourself of the pleasures of my company. Oh, of my good cheer.
Maybe Moe's hadn't been as attenuating matching pleasures with a local stone
Or
cutter.
silo manufacturer.
Or for the matter, saber rattling with the likes of Belinda Kite.
Maybe Moe's had only emphasized the pleasure of
These 5.
So Jeanlouis shed her greatcoat along with the cold, still slicing across the fields.
Down through the fallen redbud and trumpet creeper.
And fast enough, found herself chatting with the social worker trailing the stampede.
Where she learned that this year Dettledown's Halloween would end.
And mine died with.
someone's birthday.
Whose?
Chintana wondering.
Stuffing her wool scarf into her coat sleeve.
Stitch in my side if I know, shrugged the sleepy social worker. Oh, my tired feet.
They're a handful.
Oh, sweetie, if only I could get my hands on them to say.
Chintana offered to find coffee, and when the social worker's eyes responded,
Quickly, Bobcat brightened with a yes.
Chintana happily headed off, threading her way through the crowd and the ever-helter of 7 mothers.
Mightier than and unkindest of all.
Though,
Of course I mean it, damn.
Damascus.
Pairing on the way a lunching Bob Sandlin park ranger, and even an
I want to cut up a rug with you, gas station owner.
swaying on fumes while wheezing about tax cuts and that damn old lease.
until she was
In time saves none.
To the quick.
Nickety.
Real chance de la vie, honey.
edging in on the tankards of steaming bean brew and cider, where Chintana overheard from a
Car dealer.
and taxidermist that the birthday in question
Was a champagne birthday.
And a 50th birthday, no less.
Not surprised she was carved out at midnight, one said.
She insists to the second, said the other.
For none other than
that bitch witch Belinda Kite.
Chintana all too gladly retreated.
To the quieter reaches and vacancies of the ranch.
Her cupped take sloshing in hand.
mine made up to leave long before midnight.
We're finding at last the orphans drinking it on.
On furniture and walls, like so many mad, pileated woodpeckers, ever busy.
Too many hours, assumed the social worker.
Gratefully accepted taking Chintana's concoction.
Don't know how much longer I can do this.
I have my own kids, too, to keep after, so... But I guess these also are...
Worth the extra coffee and sugar? Chintana finished.
I imagine they are the sugar.
And right then,
Young boy.
frenzied as a storm-startled wood squirrel,
Dashed over.
Can we stay for the party?
if we did, Tarf, you would have to sit with the adults and talk with the adults and act like an adult. No fidgets or fusses, not one peep.
And that sure made 9-year tart fidget plenty.
Which hardly curtailed the 4-year-old girls.
Cottontail curiosities.
What about the supplies? There's an idea, Stiffus.
The social worker called out to the 2 8-year-olds.
And 7-year-old.
In mid-raccoon frolic.
Cutting decks, scattering decks of long ago.
Ravaged cards.
Our Mickett
The social worker continued.
has asked about the surprise, but I'm only going to say this once.
And so the orphans re-rounded, colliding, a sudden blue jay of a rarity, wheeling as one before finally settling on the fence of quiet attention.
Yes, Moe's Dental Down has arranged a surprise
A special surprise for you and the others.
Youngins.
this night, but weather seems playing for some delay here, so we'll need to show some
Patience.
Until then, there is the matter of some cake.
Whereupon, and you're instantly too.
Chintana was lost in the swirl and ride of squeals and shouts just as
Suddenly,
They were gone.
Tarf,
they
Emilia,
Siphus and
It'll make it
5 white-tailed deer in race.
fleetly bounding by and around the knees of minglers and newcomers.
racing 6-witch quick down long halls far and away.
Whippoorwills!
Cedar waxwings on air.
Straight at last for those faraway kitchen doors battering out.
Large slices of buttery light.
Could lose a hand, Chintana laughed.
Could lose more than that, the social worker gleaned.
What sort of surprise is it this year anyway?
And the social worker, already trudging after the orphan, shrugged.
Just a
Story.
Tell her.
breath, gentleness, and gratitude
Chintana's twin typically counseled.
must precede love.
She was a yoga body, meditating low carb.
Tibet-trekking cat lover.
And a butcher to boot.
That's why, before any heart stuff,
Voice happily prick stitching the shifting.
Cellular connection.
you first breathe and think, and practice breathing and thinking, and gently too, with every breath.
Jim and I had tried to practice, but just breathing required so much force it was almost inconceivable to imagine gratitude.
Let alone gentleness.
And anyway, gratitude for what or who?
What about Belinda Kite?
Belinda Kite.
The idea rushed spouts of color to her face. That lavish creature of bleach and gold, proudly pedigreed in the bloodlines of Texas foolery with a predatory...
If perstatory taste.
For minor men of all sports.
Usually not citizens, neither.
Offering the poor minority the charity of her shape and touch.
Offering them their reverie.
Who would as casually buy a Mercedes as dole out mercy every other year? Her mercy last year, in the backseat of her SUV with one of those boat people.
A Thai flower man married to a...
Thai seamstress.
A tight, muddy man who could tenderly lift fields of wild blue pine.
Blackberry lily.
and lush evening primrose from the grieving earth,
Neither Chintana nor the marriage could afford that kind of Mercedes.
or survive that kind of mercy.
Pravat never had a chance.
and the loss of some larger dream for him.
Some cultural intertwining.
Co-illusion, coupled with the betrayal, Belinda Kite's and his own, left him too cut up inside, also gutted and gutless after all.
To carry on.
And to have him,
All Belinda had to do was press into his cupped hands a frail bit of embroidery her own fingers had
Clumsily threaded, and at points,
bled upon,
barely managing with cruel white work and a forbidden stitch that,
Mocking shade of a seal.
harvester,
with dark orange
wings,
to leave him though,
and soon after too.
Belinda Kite was far more bloodless.
A pasty blue-eyed ex-officer explaining in diligent tones how even stepping towards a doorbell could be read as trespassing.
and so punishable by the law.
Chintana found out every disconcerting detail and even
Snip, snip.
Undid.
Stitch by
the
stitch.
offending thief.
Intoxicant.
Spell-casting lore.
Because Chintana had been the only one Pravat knew well enough to confess his torture to.
When he left in April, flights of green-backed herons shrieking in his brow told her
What he'd already made of his wife, but the
Falling ignorant,
On his lips also told her.
he had finally stopped bleeding inside.
he could smile vaguely again.
limply clap her hand with his two riverbed hands, nodding gratefully only because, like the desiccated rose of his flowers and tears,
Black crutches, all of it now.
Mere shadows on the gray.
He too, like a passing day.
Was already gone.
The social worker had mentioned other.
Youngins.
But that night, Chintana saw no sign of any more.
maybe the increasing cold.
Or the peculiar threat of a storm.
Or Belinda Kite's birthday.
Had turned parents from wrestling with seatbelts and car seats.
Those so...
Many lists of babysitters tacked conveniently by a phone.
Jintana rubbed the violet line on her thumb as a woman with topaz clamped on her ears burst past her towards a small bathroom tucked under the main stairs.
Such a hateful ball!
The woman's sput-stutter sobbed at Chintana.
To no one in particular.
Diving for the comforts of lock and running water.
Whereupon Chintana's thumb abruptly began to soar a little.
She felt bleak.
As if 1,000.
Vengeances upon vengeances were dicing her suddenly.
Into hail.
Though the cause was none too mysterious.
The front door just stood wide open.
Though when it had been flung so, Jintana would never remember.
The porch lights were extinguished too, oddly.
And what's more, a shadow now cut across the threshold.
Though without moon or stars in the Texas sky, this was an awful impossibility.
For here, reaching towards her, it seemed was a shadow cast by nothing other.
Than the darkness itself.
Most would have denied the sight with a turn.
A cry, flight,
But maybe because Chintana too, day out and night in,
could so easily consider doing the same.
What would leave these rooms drenched in silence?
and blood.
She welcomed him.
The orphans.
Was all he said.
And Chintana showed him the way.
At first the five.
Orphans.
5 jittery swamp rabbits.
Know some better gophers.
Recoiled at the sight of the story.
Tell her.
It didn't help that the library had not suited his taste, so his hulking form,
Bent and growling.
Had led them up a tight wind of back stairs into a small parlor already dimly lit with
5 season-poured candles of ginger.
Cinnamon.
nutmeg,
cloves.
And molasses clustered in an uneven arc away from the 5 dark windows, all tightly closed.
Surely Moses' work.
Only when he finally sat down on the floor did the orphan seem to relax.
Enchanted, quick enough by the manner of his diminishing.
So crossing his legs, folding himself into himself.
Refolding until right before their eyes he no longer seemed...
Prowling, no gawking, but sat quiet still.
Overdraped in his strange silvery black tunic, his head heavily bowed.
Following this example, Tarf,
Is a
Enidia,
Sithis and
Mickett sat down too,
crossing their legs, and if not,
exactly little.
and bushy blue stem cozy.
then armadillo tight.
wanting now only to know what was inside.
as for the social worker, with her burden of watchful responsibility momentarily suspended,
She took her place in a back corner lounge chair and stretching out her legs, yawned.
Chintana as well succumbed to her own shadows and seed.
Trying idly to figure out
This figure's peculiar origins.
The narrow eyes or sharp squeezed brows, the profoundly wide forehead.
or the dark lips rounding out into the deeper creases of his cheek, all mute and formless, but somehow adding up to something Chintana knew only as
Awfully.
Or perhaps it wasn't him at all, but another question of origin.
the box he carried.
A narrow thing with angles of black.
6 feet long, easy, with an ochre sash for a handle above the odd engraving.
T50YS.
The 4 hinges faced in towards him. The 5 metal latches faced out towards the orphans.
The number of latches confused her and warned her.
But Chintana didn't know what to do with warnings anymore.
What I have to tell you, he began slowly.
I must show you. But what I showed you, I must also tell you. I have...
Only myself and where I've been and
What I found and what I now bring.
And it will frighten you. This was not the way such
Tales for 5
Such orphans.
usually began.
Mickett cocked her head to one side, and his aide's hands fussed in his pocket.
Well, maybe there would still be some fun, Chintana mused.
maybe the story.
Teller's strange and pompous gravity would be refused with
Bitterins and
frowns.
Yet if the cloudy phrases released them,
His ever so slight nod towards the box recaptured them.
All I have to offer is right here to see. But if you scare easily, you should leave.
Tarf looked at his aide.
who looked at Enidia, who looked at
Who
Sithis,
looked at Mickett, who defiantly looked back at the dark man.
Man in his
long
with
box.
angles of black.
and so they all stayed.
I am a bad man with a very black heart. And it was only that badness and blackness which forced me to seek out what I am.
Carried now for many years, and brought this night for you. Because you are young, I will tell you I went in search of a weapon.
But also because you are young, I will not tell you why I went in search of such a weapon. Though in truth, well, I could speculate.
I am no longer capable of recalling the details myself.
When you are older, you will be able to imagine what drove me on such a
Quest.
You will know then more than me.
But saying this, he did not look at the orphans, only at Chintana.
And maybe it was a coincidence, but her thumb began to hurt a little more.
At first, I went to places I knew.
Familiar places.
I examined ropes and knives of many sorts.
I considered oils and poison.
I toyed with explosives.
I handled guns. Small guns, big guns.
Guns powerful enough to
Sever something.
anything in half with just one blast.
Chintana shifted uncomfortably.
Where were the animals?
The gleefully abandoned or
The stormy skies, not appropriate for a
Ghost story for the young.
Where was the comedy?
The social worker, however, seemed unconcerned.
That or too exhausted to resist the comforts of her recliner.
But none of it, the story.
Teller continued.
Could match my taste for what my blackness ceaselessly scratched for.
And so I traveled farther and farther away.
From north to
South, mountain to
Valley, coast to
Coast.
Season by
season.
Until finally, I left the country on a ship, setting out for away and far places where faces are different.
and songs cradle words neither you nor I have ever heard.
And everywhere I stopped, everywhere I ate,
or drank.
or slept.
I asked about
A weapon.
yet even in those distant places, I received the same response.
ropes, knives, poisons, explosives, and guns.
I shook my head and my heart blackened more and my badness spread so that
Whatever I touched, my badness touched too.
And seed into.
Until finally, one night on the banks of a muddy flow,
What some might call a stream.
on the edge of another dirty city.
I took cover from a rain beneath slabs of concrete twisted through with rusted rebar and
Pain. It was a shelter I soon discovered already populated.
By rats.
But where I also overheard a story about
A valley of salt and
a forest of notes,
And a mountain of
any
One.
paths, and a man with no
harms who made terrible weapons which he sold, but never for
money.
Intrigued, I asked for a retelling of the story.
Carefully then, I listened, memorizing every detail.
Prodding him to reveal still more until I was satisfied.
Knew no more. And then I thanked him.
And I killed.
Chintana jerked forward sharply.
Trying in vain to grab hold again of the words so casually uttered.
So easily laid open.
Laid bare.
Unable to believe he'd said them in the first place, even if his
And Nadia did whimper
and Migot's head bent down, her eyes suddenly fixed.
And considerably,
on the worn crimson carpet.
if only the social worker had given just one indecatation of alarm.
Chintana would have put a stop to the whole thing.
But blinks too of disbelief.
Enforced probably by her own trepidador.
Could merely put both women on a temporary state of alert.
Only his eyes.
Gray pools of glum lake ice told Chintana what he had just succeeded in doing.
He had involved them.
And what's more, had now made
Them.
accountable.
Soon then.
His always low,
Rumbadelling voice continued.
the gutters of cities.
Curious derelictions half buried in abandoned farmland.
Poisonous pools, lingering in ancient.
Quarries began to speak to me of
Away.
And I listened, and I...
Followed, and after many months in roads strewn
in ruin, I came upon a course to what I would call the Valley
of salt. There nothing moved, and I was
Alone. Anything that had stumbled.
upon such a wide way of gray grief had not.
Chosen to stay.
Only shadows remained.
Even mine left a charcoal smudge upon those dissected steeps.
Perhaps.
Oh.
We're still there today.
and I saw remnants of many a strange shadow too. Did you know stars
Have shadows? They do. And can you imagine what it feels like to walk upon the shadow
of a day?
I can't.
But I don't have to.
Soon after a long stretch among these
Shades of the grave, I began to feel a staring dryness remove me from myself at any chance I'd have to move.
Conversely, my shadow mark seemed to assume increasingly the
Braid of substance.
a vocation, a point where in it I grew still. But right when I felt I should have become nothing,
More than a staid cratch of black.
An unbent dark like a spent moon.
I found I had left the valley.
Of salt and was now deepening into the forest of
Falling.
notes,
So here, you say, in a forest.
Where I immediately found plenty of water, I should also find relief.
and rest.
I felt the same. I even felt happy enough to sing a few
Notes. And sing the story.
Teller suddenly did.
Much to the amusement of the orphans and even Chintan.
A series of clucks.
Trills.
sputters and
Odd clicks caught in whistles in the back of his throat.
He grinned weirdly, and before stopping,
Even whoomed.
But this was only the song I sought to sing, not what ultimately spilled.
Out of my lips, that sound was completely different.
For you see in the peculiar forest of
Falling notes, sounds could not hold.
together,
Like pearls on a snip.
Silk thread, they
scattered wildly upon
the ground.
It did not matter the sort of sound either. Whether a melody, a whistle, or even
nick, trick, or
Lip grip.
all of it fell apart. It was even in the falling apart of a breeze.
though was there a breeze?
If I could still feel it on my face.
And in the falling apart of rustling needles.
and seed.
Though were there even these?
if I could still feel them under my feet,
Even the stream I drank from, though it curled with
I
taste.
could only hear, in the terrifying way, all the sound of all.
The world there was
Constantly.
severed.
Worse. One was initially curious and startled and became more and
More terrible, for I began to fear as the sound of my passage and even my own thoughts were.
This mattered, that I was with ever
varied velocity going nowhere, that I had come from
Nowhere, that I was lost and soon too like that.
matter of my uncertain
breath would scatter among the turns of these.
Unspeakable wood.
Toff with frowns, Isay,
In Nadia,
And Sisyphus.
With exchanged glances, it omit it with a yawn. Reveal then that they too were lost in their attention.
scattering.
But the story
Teller missed
nothing.
Ah, yes. How hard it is to imagine that forest falling.
Notes, I know.
And he lowered his head.
Dramatically.
Causing the orphans to reflexively rock forward.
Imagine, he said pointedly.
His eyes still lost in the
Downward tumble of his pose.
Imagine every sound of
Sigh of but one thing.
dying instead of
Coming one after another.
Sigh.
A sigh of
all at once.
what would that sound like?
And the story.
Teller raised his head to look at one of the windows.
And Chintana felt something within,
Her part,
like a whale.
Butterfly
hope and hold. Not over the stabbing.
pain in her thumb.
either,
Which had clearly gotten much, much worse.
but over a horror far more simple.
She knew the windows had all been closed.
She remembered it clearly by the way the candles
Burned all five.
Flames
arrogantly vertical.
Impervious.
Now, though, the flames flickered wildly.
Dancing on the
Of
edge.
annihilation as a shriek of wind.
Freeze and sky whirled around the room. Somehow, one window was now
Wide open.
Already the social worker had
Leapt up to close it, puzzled.
confused, but clearly too drowsy to pay too much mind.
The story.
Teller had the answer, but he only
Looked at the
Orphans with his own questions, which they responded to.
and in surprising unanimity.
with a question of their own.
Then what happened?
I left gladly the forest of falling
Note only to find myself at the base of a precarious path rising up from twisting leaps of snow and looming
boulders wrapped in pale wisps of always moving.
Cloud.
the mountain
Of many one.
Paths had only one path as far as I could tell. Here at least, my shadow.
traveled with me, and the songs I whistled made sense.
In fact, the mountain seemed
Trust.
Mountain.
only when I began the dangerous ascent did I start.
To proceed through the briefly parting veils of
Paul and missed another climber on what I admitted then had to be
The second path.
Soon the figure was enveloped in white, never to be seen again. I had begun to forget the sighting when on a
completely different part of the mountain. Below me this time, I momentarily caught
sight of another climber on a
third path.
This time, I moved down a little in his direction, only to watch a twisting sheet of white wipe him from my sight.
Nor was that the last time. On the contrary, it was the beginning.
Climbers began to
pop up all over the
Mountain. Always on a different
path, always swept away by mist before reappearing somewhere else.
Eventually, though, I managed to get a little closer before the pale wind
Stole these solitary figures away. And it was then that I
could see how all of them looked
exactly the same.
And not just the same as one another, but the same as
Me.
And while to this day, I cannot really tell you what took place on the
Mountain of
many one paths,
I understand still that in spite of so many climbing figures,
on so many paths. I was completely
alone up there.
far worse than the
petrified shadows in the fallen notes,
the multiplication upon
multiplication of my own solitude.
Brought me repeatedly to the edge of despair, which is where
quite sensibly, really. I finally found the
Man with no
arms. First there to greet me, though, was
the soft love of Osage orange and
a burnt hush surrounding me.
softening me, and how sleepy my strange travels had made me.
So I fell
into
a hammock
hung
Between two black willows,
two black hills.
overleaning the edge of a pond where
I slept for 3 days and 3 nights.
And when at last I woke, I saw on the other
side of that pond a small hut, the door
Wide open, with smoke drifting up from a
Chimney somewhere off in the back.
Upon entering, I found only
2 chairs at a tiny table supporting one large bowl of hot tea.
I sat and drank all the tea, and when I lowered the bowl, I discovered sitting opposite me the man.
Man with no
arms. so startled by his presence.
The grayness of his presence, gray hair, gray whiskers.
Gray eyebrows, grayer still his
Wide eyes.
pupilless eyes. All of him gray, except for his
Eyelashes. Long, willowy lashes rising out and up this.
If they were falling away from the earth itself. Not gray at all, but
luminous.
Violet.
I jerked backwards, dropping the empty bowl with a lingering
clatter.
And right then, the story
teller also jerked back,
his two hands.
pale as February,
Thrust out from underneath the silvery black tunic.
to ward off some wild apparition, his grin twisted into
Mock fear.
startling the orphans into a laughter which, in their own way,
Elicited his own chilling.
laughed.
You have come a long way.
The man with
No arms.
said to me first, and I in vain.
Trying to locate the fallen bowl could only nod.
You have come for one of my swords.
And again I nodded, though I had not known.
The weapons he made were swords.
You know they are expensive.
But your heart is black and prices you know as much as you know what price is.
Is no matter for you.
I said yes this time, and the
Man,
No.
arms laughed like a corkscrew.
There were so many. Some so small they could barely reach halfway across one of your palms.
Some though were wide as
a stair. Some wider.
Then a road, some curved like
thunder.
Some were
Straight like the
seas tides. Still others were thin like the breath of a June dew.
and a few I saw waved like heat.
off an August noon. But all, as far as I could tell, had the same type of blade. Milky white,
Glossy and cold like
A fog creeping low across a morning before.
A funeral.
In fact, so curious was I about their composition, I reached out to
touch one. And if not for a sharp click and a wild
fluttering of his violet eyelashes, I would have succeeded.
They cut every time, warned the man with
No arms.
every.
Time.
Smartly, I withdrew.
Here, he blinked quickly at a blade.
At least 4 feet long, tapering to a blunt tip.
This one took me 3 winters to make.
It kills the taste of salt. The one next to it kills the smell of
Wild lupine, blackberry lily, and lush evening.
Primrose. There,
Turning to a fat blade suspended in the buzzing gray.
that one kills the color green.
and the man with no arms.
Grinned because he already knew the darkness I guarded and
With violent lash fluttering, turned away from those tiny cuts and led me
On to those deeper cuts, blinking in and out of the strange.
Shift thickening haze.
here only a few swords floated.
These ones take lives, his violet lashes.
battered. But unlike the smaller ones and the fat ones, they all appear to be
The same. Sleek.
and long and
Bold like a theft.
but they're not the same at all. Closest
To you is a 10-year sword, that
a
one's
25-year sword, 100 above it, and there a
280.
7-year sword.
And this one? I asked, tentatively reaching for the handle until...
unchecked. I actually took hold of it.
That's your 50-year sword, he said.
Oddly.
You almost can't see?
The blade I added, marveling at the way the weapon bit through the air.
The way the finely carved handle.
Bound in a fine fall braid, beaded.
The winks of pale pearl seemed with every swipe to melt into my
Palm. Oh, the man
With no arms chuckled.
You can never
See the blade.
which I would not understand until I'd returned and found my
Blade had dissolved into breezes and hours.
But will it kill him? I wanted to know.
Dimly resenting him now that my sword hung once again in that flickering deep.
In half a century, from birth to the...
final second of the 50th year.
Every time?
Most of the time.
This surprised me.
Why most? No weapon is perfect. Whatever this blade passes through, it most certainly
Will divide. Though there is one thing which can stitch and hold the...
Ooh.
What's that? Ah,
Your heart is blacker than will ever be told. But that is why you're
here.
Beyond him then, I caught sight of still more swords. Though these were...
inconceivably long,
For you, maybe.
said the man with no arms.
For me, they are as they are. Some
Mile long, some a river long. There is one that is a sky long.
They kill lives too.
I suppose. One sword will kill a season. One will kill a country. One I'm making now.
Will even kill an idea.
An idea, I pondered. But those are too expensive for you. And his violet lashes seemed to tremble with delight.
How much?
I pressed.
the wielder must die before...
Wielding it.
But
I objected.
yes, it's tricky. Too tricky for you, as I already said.
Too expensive.
Then the man with no arms led me back among the tiny, wavering swords. These cost a breath you may never take again. Those, a feeling you may never shape again. Then his lashes quivered daintily.
Beware though, as all are double-edged, and come with this warning.
Should a wound ever fail,
You,
Will vanish.
like the blade.
You wield. But I didn't care.
what about the 50-year sword?
Your sword? His violet lashes twitching. Slyly.
I could not object. I knew too it was my sword. I knew.
When the handle melted beneath my fingers and the blade shivered.
Familiarly along my arm and into my past. Yes, how much is my sword? A memory you have which would have
Outlived.
You.
And before I had even finished saying agreed, the man
with no arms somehow already
Held clenched.
between his teeth the handle of a sword with the blade which swayed
like a long blade of evening grass. Just as quickly, too, he slid behind
me, and I felt a sting between
My shoulder blades, and then a fire, and a cold, and a sudden something.
seep of hurt. And then my eyes dried up, and they also hurt.
There, blinked the man with no arms, happily showing me what was now
Separate, suspended carefully.
In the air.
a single
Harvester,
With dark orange.
wings struck through with light and
dapples.
a bruised dark.
What is it? I wanted to know.
But his violet lashes flickered, as if now to say no. And he boxed up my 50-year sword and never said more.
And so I descended the mountain of...
Anyone paths crossing back through the
Forest of...
No, before finally making my way...
away from the valley.
Assault.
And only in the years to come would I realize what
He had taken.
My heart stayed just as...
black and my badness spread.
More easily, but
The memory.
And reason
behind such blackness and badness had
Vanished completely.
which is my
Story.
There
is
no more. And even if the story
Teller had indeed,
cut himself short,
which it seemed to Chintana he had.
he gave
No indacitation, only hunching his shoulders and...
lowering his eyes with a sigh.
a sight so seeped with sadness, even the orphans.
responded to it.
Jindana knew better though,
She listened instead to her chest,
which guarded a more subtle ear, and she...
Excepitated the sharpened...
shrill of her thumb,
For even as the social worker snored now in her recliner, and the storyteller
seemed to recomport himself into an even smaller stillness. Jeanlouis knew what the orphans
were about to ask, which somehow meant she also knew.
He too knew what they would ask and how he would answer. In fact, the only thing Jeanlouis did not know
was how she herself would
respond.
At least get up, she tried to tell herself, but though
already on the edge of her seat, as in
the poison of a dream, she felt unable to move even
an itsy bit.
Tarf grunted then, refusing,
unable
to look away from the long
box with its angles of
black, and so asking,
Is that the sword? And of course, all 5 windows
were open now, and the window had fallen.
Clouds
split apart with falling
hail ripped
into the room, and the 5
flames on fire,
wicks on fire,
candles of molasses,
cloves,
nutmeg,
cinnamon, and ginger shook and faltered, but no one there could
heed the candles
anymore or understand them.
shadows are hither,
Note or follow
the
paths.
Not even Jeanlouis, who try as she might still could not wrench herself free.
And so Tarf did as he was told,
Lifting the first latch. And so Zayd did as he was told,
lifting the second latch.
And so Anidia did as she was told,
lifting the third latch. And so Sithis did as he was told,
Lifting the fourth latch.
and so Mikit did as she was told,
lifting the last latch.
and then all withdrew as the storyteller
leaned forward and lifted the lid.
"Hey!" Tarf immediately objected.
It's empty!
Yeah! Izad, Nadia,
And Sithis chorused,
Mikit even giggled.
the weight is missing. But the story
Teller's lack of,
surprise.
Reminded them.
as he quietly reached in to pull free the finely carved handle,
bound in fall braid and beaded with wings of pale pearl.
in fact, so mesmerized was everyone by the promise of its
Mild bend. No one seemed to notice how the storyteller
was already standing,
Filling the room, his shoulders expanding out to the wall.
the back of his neck pressing up against the ceiling.
All of him.
howling and gawking.
His shadow falling not from, but towards the terrified candlelight.
Upon
He began to swing the handle in a wide, but deliberately
slow,
arc as if to pass a long blade through the wicks of those 5
Candles, nearly 6 feet away, were indeed a yellow panic there. Perhaps by extraordinary coincidence, momentarily cowed.
small rounds of blue and drowning smoke. How his lips gleamed sharp red then, as gripping the handle with
Both hands, he raised it high above his head, twisting his shoulders
though
away.
never relinquishing his gaze,
fixed awfully on the orphans.
still seated at his feet.
Instinctively, Tarf and his head jerked their arms up in front of their faces.
And Nadia yelled, Sithis leaped out of line.
Mikit wailed.
Jeanlouis forced herself then from a chair, but she was
Too far too.
Oh, so very brave too.
Late the story.
Storyteller already swinging down and across the necks of the 5
A
orphans.
vicious and terrible round.
with even worse implications if his hands hadn't clutched.
Nothing at all.
For indeed,
at the height of their ruin,
yet before their crime,
They,
those hands,
pale as February, had been so
So seamlessly
and
so.
so expertly so,
stripped clean.
replaced with a ladle of angry air.
Tripe, hogwash, bologna, and hooey.
Belinda Kite spat loudly, striding forward, the handle now
Somehow miraculously.
in her possession. How easily, too, it seemed she had just reached
Out of the shadows and plucked free from him his glacial grasp,
the end of his story.
Despite herself, Jeanlouis was
Overjoyed, even if she also wondered what on earth could have prompted such a display of uncommon heroics. Had some protective instinct
suddenly insisted she act on behalf of the orphans, or was it just more evidence of
Belinda Kite's natural predisposition to
a
spoil.
pretty gripping moment.
whatever the case, she now dangled.
the curious?
Handle between her 2 very nimble fingers.
It's time to cut out such doo-doo.
Look closely, my children. This is nothing but a bit of bony foodie.
Whereupon Belinda Kite Kite
To further substantiate her claim,
proceeded to swing and
To no effect.
stab, gash, cross.
Flame, chop, slash,
hew,
pare, lop,
perforate, puncture, slit.
Pierce, sunder, and jab the hand.
handle herself all over
Herself and around herself, across,
through, making
Forward across Chris, her knees, thighs.
waist, dice, fingers, wrists,
elbows and arms, sectioning,
filleting and
lancing neck, jaw,
nose,
Ears and
scalp. A complete hacking and desiccating of her
body, entire, no part of her untouched or
unmitigated.
And everyone there, though
No one else would have admitted the possibility that someone else had
Seen so or
saw so
caught a glimpse.
now and then of something
slippery,
biting through the air.
white and vague.
like a slow, cold fog creeping across an evening after.
A burial.
Belinda Kite sent us.
Storyteller.
Packing with his long box of black angles. And leave,
He did in the aftermath of the blizzard.
Even if no one saw him.
go. The social worker had loaded the children.
Into the van, only to discover it wouldn't start.
Chintana's jumper cables didn't help.
The county clerk called the tow truck.
Someone then remarked that the night felt wide and
Deserted.
Without creature,
Or comparison.
Brought of wood and mud mute.
The kennel was empty. Not even a wing flinging its shady,
Whisper over field.
void of paw print, step.
or even moon.
in the kitchen, a caterer informed a just arriving and very hairy school teacher that the children had left.
Long ago. To which this very late,
Tell of stories.
the only one most Dettelsome had hired.
Sighed heavily, abandoning at last his plans for animals and
Stormy nights in favor of a bowl of spaghetti.
Far
A
follow.
wedge of pear tart.
and eventually a deep glass of scotch, all while he cursed his
Sedan and the early freeze.
Though still managing to make the caterer giggle with limericks about
Cutting the cheese.
But the caterer was wrong. The children hadn't left just yet, and as mine died, midnight.
Midnight. Just as midnight approached, they were
upstairs again in the storytelling room, waiting for their ride.
Revoluting against sleep, peering down at the guests gustering about
In
outside.
the snow on the
back patio,
where, with most of the caterers,
cut loose hours ago.
the skeleton crew did their best to fast uncork.
Bottles of sugary champagne and
Fill brim high all those platic goblets.
Somewhere someone began to sing.
none of that, thank you.
Belinda Kite snapped.
Just raise up the bubbly and choke.
It bad.
Happy birthday to me, spoken will do.
The woman with topaz clamped on her ears was the first to scoop a second.
Phil.
no doubt to take the edge off.
Many were very drunk, but no one was cut off
Chintana, without a glass,
of anything.
To fortify herself against the biting cold, didn't know.
what to make of why everyone else.
Including herself, had agreed to stand outside.
Belinda Kite, because she claimed to adore the snow, had demanded her toast take place in it. And for some reason,
Everyone obliged, though Chintana could not see many liked it, and even less liked
Her, focusing instead on the
champagne. The clicking of plastic on
Platic rim.
anything and everything but.
Belinda.
And then swiftly by swiftly, as the moments edged closer to midnight.
closer ever to Belinda Kite's
50th birthday.
50th!
Chintana with whirls of
Butterfly suddenly panicking inside her.
So Sunflower Wild began to understand something she could not have prepared herself for.
No matter, Belinda Kite had desecrated everything that mattered to her.
Everything that had made sense.
No matter, Jintana now moved through light and stream a grave.
By tints of indecent rage,
Jintana still chose not
To abandon Belinda Kite.
and so as seconds,
flickered seconds.
on seconds,
from 12.
Like long violet lashes,
Chintana forced herself from the promise of infliction's peace.
It was, after all,
all Chintana had of her. In fact, it was all Belinda Kite had.
had of herself.
not once ago frail embroidery, her
fingers had
Nimbly and tenderly.
Stitched and bled upon, finding in grassy thread the shape of
That single harvester with dark orange.
wings long gone,
Yet by which Chintana could now clearly find.
remembering it,
Recovering it.
reminding it.
Releasing it. As she had immediately remembered when.
Pravat had at last handed it over to her.
For this is what hurts so much.
No deceit at all, but the reach only of
And from a longing and already parting,
Woman.
A reach which tonight
From this same woman.
had also saved 5 children from the murder of
fate. And so Chintana tried hard to keep breathing, even as her
Thumb throbbed terribly
and
and
a solitary tear
sliced down her cheek.
Which was when clock hands across Upshur County finally...
clasped limply around midnight and said goodbye, which was when,
Belinda Kite caught sight of Chintana.
coming apart,
figuratively.
With the tear, that is.
Ensnared.
Baby, your hubby was a lousy fuck.
From their window, the children were the first to see the snow splash.
red,
red,
Even before Belinda Kite
knew what was happening, before she could make sense of the
muffled screams and recoil, suddenly unrounding her as she...
right on the spot.
literally
Went to pieces.
Tarf,
an idea.
Make it.
Zayden,
Saw all 5
Fingers slide away and tumble to the
In
ground.
a soundless
Spray of blood.
but even as slices of joints and nails scattered apart on the frosty stone,
Followed by the slow, toppling
Slivers of the rest of Belinda Kite's
hand.
gold bangles loose,
too,
Chintana was already
racing forward,
dedicating others to call for help.
reaching,
racing.
Reaching.
Oh, how she raced for her.
How she reached for her,
Until she was reaching Belinda Kite.
grabbing her.
Holding her.
cradling her.
In her arms.
Wrapping her up tight in her grave coat.
The scarf tight around the tortured arm.
Stroking the woman's head, but she understood at any moment.
Could also fall,
Away.
and so
Though Jonathan and I kept calling,
Aloud for someone.
For anyone.
inside, she quietly continued to accept the mercy-laden,
Merciless agony of what?
only survives as
Entirely personal.
Without
witness all
that really matters here.
What only matters.
hers,
Herself.
for now.
Holding on to it.
Patiently.
like she held on to,
Just as she held on to.
Belinda Kite.
Belinda Kite.
Gently and painfully and
Gratefully too.
Accepting them all.
and with great sloppy breaths too.
even if she also continued to wonder.
Just how long one such tiny stitch of
You know,
Could really hold.
to Jeanlouis, who provided us with the amazing shadows. So you'll have an opportunity to talk with them about what you just experienced. We'll have a raffle after the Q&A for a copy of the 50-Year Sword. There's also a second show at 9, and there's a book signing that will happen here as well. So if you don't get a chance to get your book signed, feel free to hang out at the bar. There'll be another show and more revelry out in the lobby. So we'll get started in just a second.
John, where are you? Happy Halloween.
Questions? Comments?
How did you orchestrate the voices?
It was tricky. The actors worked very, very hard. I mean, it's this strange relationship between attempting to retain a certain voice carried out by the actor and their own impression of where the story was coming from, and then at the same time fusing it all into one voice that actually somehow retained meaning, so it wasn't like the falling of notes in the chorus. So it was a strange balance, and we kind of had to play around with sometimes, change up who was saying what lines, and try to get a sense of sort of the music of that. And that's really how the metaphor of a conductor and musician sort of emerged on its own. We realized that it required a conductor, it required a sort of lead in this. It was a very intense experience for everyone involved, just trying to keep all this meaning together in these 5 different voices.
Is this form of voice conducting ever been done before?
No, I don't think I've ever seen it. Has anyone ever seen it like this? 5 voices moving that quickly? All right. Halloween.
Why did you choose that particular device to use multiple voices?
Well, that's very much part of the story. The story is really how we stitch together certain narratives, and how we create our own history, but that all our histories and all our narratives are actually little pieces that are fused together, whether it's the voice of peers, the voice of parents, or the voice of things we've read or heard. And so what I wanted to do was bring into focus how much these things are cut up, but at the same time still give it meaning, complicated meaning, but meaning nonetheless. And so that originates really out of the story.
So there's a question back here and then here. Did you always intended this performance piece?
I always intended that it would be read by multiple voices. That definitely is indicated in the text itself with the colored quotation marks and how it frames that. And it's strange. I always felt there were shadows involved, and I can't quite describe that. There's this uneasy relationship in the book between what is literal and verbal, and what starts to move away. So I think that's the point. That it moves away from the text because it starts to move towards voice. And always those voices seem to be accompanied by shadows. So for me, it was a quest to not only literalize the voices, but actually, how do I begin to fill and not illustrate, but sort of play in part, like the shadows of these characters would then have their own life. Christine and I worked very hard on how to get the candles, because I was in love with the candles. Candles are very significant in the story. And then they became the 5 windows that you saw, which then you realize that sort of here are our 5 candles, or more appropriately, here are our 5 orphans that are telling us the story about what they'd seen long ago and what act of mercy had taken place before their eyes. And then, you know, sort of from those windows and those candles sort of moving out this wide space where shadows live. And sort of Christine's Persephone. She's the queen of the underworld back there. And you are only allowed to step back there if you are invited. Otherwise, a terrible freeze from Richard.
Your writing utilizes a lot of self-imposed constraints, and among those, intentional misspellings or mispronunciations we heard tonight. How do you decide on those constraints, and how does it work in your process?
Well, there's certainly an element that's sonic, yes, the oral interpretation of it all. But also those words are very, you know, carefully constructed, not just for sounds, but also for how those meanings are sort of tripping through that particular piece. You know, so you can look at the way they sort of bend, the words themselves kind of distort. But when you're looking at the distortion, you'll find that they actually kind of apply to what's going on and how. And it also kind of recognizes again that there's this quality of vocalization that's imperfect, you know. And imperfect is even the wrong word, or misspelling is the wrong word. It just, what it's trying to show the dynamic nature of language, the dynamic nature of storytelling, bringing that back out in the text. Playful, yes. As John pointed out, playful. Don't be like our playful scattering of pearls.
There used to be a form of storytelling called a magic lantern show at the end of the 1800s. Do you think it was something like this? Mark Twain and certain writing.
Yeah, they still happen, and those are done slides mostly. So it's like there's a big sort of machine, magic lantern, small and big, and they put the slides in. So yeah, very similar to having images of the story.
But I think though that there's a movement away from a still text to frame to things that are breaking the frame of what you're doing, moving, some velocity, dimensionality. In my case, it's dimension. There you go. There's it. Play, right?
I wanted to know the significance of the characters being named after spices, and if those spices, the attributes of those spices influenced those characters like molasses and cinnamon.
Well, technically the names, the story, in the book itself, the characters are not named. They're just, there's a nod towards the spices of fall, Halloween. But it's really difficult when you ask actors who are reading very quickly to recognize quickly the color of their quotation marks. You know, cloves and molasses can look very similar. And so it's a big clusterfuck. Ben, quite a bit actually. By the way, thank you all. Because, you know, for being able to turn around and look at you and be so wildly entertained.
Starting here and then working across in the camera.
Both the music and the puppetry the shadow reminded me of like Wayankulis in Indonesia. That's what I got. And I was just curious, when you were doing music, were you using things like analogs or whatever? Like, because the bell sounds, like, I remember those as a kid in Indonesia, like how the story moves, and like how you know characterization is also played by.
sound, in the text, the intrusion in the middle always feels a lot more violent than the way you represented it. Why did it sound that way?
John, I'm going to give that one to you.
Which particular intrusion? Is it storyteller?
When
the big, bold storyteller song, we're back and forth on
Right. Well, we put this together. Today was the first time we played.
Yeah, the very first
So
time.
I was conservative in a lot of ways on this, and I found myself just going back and seeing how things went. So I think
And really, a hand for John and a hand for Christine. And we had a really sweet group back there. And there's this one adorable child. That's the only way to refer to her. Sorry, Claire. I know she's at UCLA. And, well, this was a wonderful Claire moment. When she said, we got to do a quick rehearsal of the curtain call. Claire went, what's a curtain call? It moved me. I'm moved by strange things. My demented pumpkins move me.
Okay, all the way back and then those long ears.
Wow.
When you start working with the shadows and how you want to do it for the show, what made you decide what parts you actually want to represent and what you'd rather stay away from and let the words decide? Because it's going to be, because I'm sure there's probably a desire to want to put everything in some kind of movement behind it with the music underneath it, and then to like put the words to the story in these two little pieces. What made you decide what to do?
And that was a long discussion, which was really quite fruitful for me. Just how to balance what was apparently literal, and I even don't like to use that word, and then definitely more evocative, I guess. So, that's what you really have to wrestle with.
Yeah, I think that there were some things that just sort of, as soon as I heard them, I knew I wanted to make the shadow of the star, and I wanted to make the pearls, and I wanted to make all the things that we don't see in everyday clothing. So I wasn't that interested in making balloons and working puppets and things like that, you know. So I just went first with the things that really caught me, and then it was the things that I asked for. I'm just
I did. No, it's true. No, I definitely wanted the butterfly.
And I couldn't figure out how to make that cool for so long, but then we figured out embroidery would be the butterfly.
And that was actually literalized in the story. There is actually a literal embroidery of a butterfly. So that seemed to grant us permission to literalize that up there. And that was something that I wanted to attach, you know, a sound theme with. And so we used Beethoven's Fates, and that was just perfect for the story. It's obsessed with fate, so this little thing. And John sort of invented this concept of being a little literal in that. But all right, Jim, you made it. You made it.
Well, yeah, my question was pretty similar actually. It was just involving the orchestration of it all and who, like, when, I guess when the sound came in and when the shadows came in, like how, I guess if it was all collaborative all at once, or if somebody started maybe with just the shadows and then you put the music to it. I don't know. I just was curious as to how it all came about.
We never really worked together.
Uh-huh.
So, like tonight when I heard certain sounds in certain parts, I was like, oh wow. So Mark probably knew what was going on. But
I had no idea.
We were just
This is the first time we've actually sat together. Really. I mean, it is actually, it's very fascinating. How long did you work on the little 20-minute piece that you, and I'm using little in quotation marks.
So I was just telling him last night, I was like, you know, Mark, I just toured with the show this summer that I worked on for 3 years, and we toured with 20 minutes of it because it takes me that much puppetry and building to put a piece together. So I think there's probably over 25 minutes of images in this play in 6 days. So I thought.
But I think it was interesting.
He said, it's good to challenge yourself.
And sadly enough, that was exactly my voice.
I couldn't find my keys. I said, do you have my keys so I'd stay and work longer?
understood what happened to Belinda at the end.
Great question. What do you think happened?
I'm not sure.
I think that's exactly the question that all of you can answer, because that's the meaning that has to be stitched together, and it's the meaning that I can't stitch together for you. But it's a great question. Good one. Yes?
There's a raffle.